Welcome back. As I mentioned in the last lesson, sibling rivalry solutions 1 and 2 go hand in hand. If we ignore fights so kids can work out conflicts on their own, we have to arm them with the strategies to actually do that. We tend to get frustrated with kids because they can't work it out. But keep in mind, conflict resolution is an advanced skill. You probably know adults who don't handle conflict resolution all that well. That's why solution number 2, training for conflict resolution, is so important, right now and in the future. So let's say you heard a fight break out, and instead of getting in the middle of it, you ignored. But, of course, you're listening from a distance. You ignored for a while, and then things started to get ugly, so it's clear they're not able to work it out on their own. In that moment, you know you have to step in and break it up. To do that, you can say, "Wow, looks like you guys are having a really hard time getting along. Let's take a break now and then get back together when everybody's calm and we can focus on solutions." Notice I said, "Wow, looks like you guys are having a hard time getting along." I didn't say anything about who did what to whom. Remember, I'm trying to avoid those victim and aggressor roles. This approach says, we have a problem. But we don't even try to deal with that problem until everyone's calmed down, and then we'll focus on solutions and not finger pointing or blaming each other. Now, this might be a totally different mindset from what your kids are used to. The situation I just described, with that fight that escalated, that's your clue. Your kids don't have the skills to resolve conflict on their own, and we wouldn't expect them to. They're kids, and this is difficult. Now we know we have to get really serious about solution number 2, training for conflict resolution. Of course, we don't want to do training when the kids are in the heat of the battle. That's not going to be effective. But at some other time when everybody is nice and calm, we want to take time for training about the new empowerment paradigm you've been learning in this course. The first tenet of the empowerment paradigm is that a child can't control the actions of another. He can't control his brother, he can't control his sister. All he can do is control himself and the environment, and that becomes our training focus. We can control the environment by implementing 3 simple rules for community living. Then we're going to teach him how to control himself with the conflict resolution tools. So let's talk first about controlling the environment with 3 rules for community living. These rules are for fights about stuff, property, territory. You know the drill. So community living rule number 1 is this. When you choose to come into the common area, the family room, the kitchen, playroom, whatever you define as the common area, you are choosing to play with your siblings. So if the child is playing in the family room, basically he's saying, anyone can join me. If the child doesn't want to play with siblings and wants to play alone, that's okay. And she can play in her room or some other space that you've assigned that she can play alone and uninterrupted. Rule for community living number 2 goes along the same lines. When you choose to leave your toys and stuff in the common area, they're fair game for your siblings to play with. So of course, if you don't want your siblings to play with your toys, or if something is new or precious, you'd want to keep it in your own room in your private space. Privacy is a right, even for our children. We have to allow them some private space for playing by themselves and keeping their special things. If they share a room, their private space can be their bed, plus some shelves or drawers, a specific part of the closet. Designate that space and make sure that all the kids are on board with everyone else's private space. And that is accessible by invitation only. Rule number 3 for community living is that play fighting is only allowed by mutual consent. So if somebody isn't enjoying the roughhousing, it has to stop. So you'll want to do some training with your family to determine which words mean, I've had enough and I want this to stop. The words may be just stop now, but everybody knows what they are and everybody agrees to follow them. This is really important training for down the road, that no means no. Now, if you have continued issues with one sibling grabbing toys from another while they're still being played with, you can also implement the waiting list. This is a great strategy that's explained in an article in this session called It's Okay Not to Share. It's an important strategy to teach kids that they can't have a toy just because they walked over and grabbed it from someone, or because they threw a fit because they wanted it. It also teaches delayed gratification as one child waits patiently for the toy until the other one is done with it. Again, you can learn more about that in the article called "It's Okay Not to Share." The 3 rules for community living will address most of the issues around property and stuff. The other training focus is controlling oneself. The child can't control another person, so we have to teach them to control themselves. To do that, we go back to the toolbox. We'll be teaching our kids some of the same tools you're learning to diffuse power struggles. When fights break out from now on, instead of running to mom or dad to tattle, we're going to teach kids how to ignore and withdraw from conflict. You'll have to role play this. So in a calm moment, you can just kind of reenact the fight and role play what each child could have done instead. We have to teach our kids that they're not victims. They have a choice. They can stay there and fight, or they can ignore it and walk away. But obviously that takes some training, because let's be honest, ignoring and walking away, that's difficult at any age. As parents, we struggle to ignore undue attention and withdraw from conflict. But if we can teach our kids to ignore and walk away at a young age, that's a gift you'll be giving them for later on in life. Of course, there are going to be times when the child will have trouble walking away, but she can still learn ways to communicate to feel more in control of the situation, and she can be building her skill bank of how to resolve problems without escalating the fight. So we'll want to train our kids to use their calm voice, even when they're feeling upset. Again, this isn't going to happen immediately, but you could practice and role play, and you modeling your calm voice. With all of that, eventually they're going to get it. Another tool they can use is to make requests versus demands. When a conflict over a toy flares up, instead of demanding it back right this minute, we can teach the child to make a request, and that's done with an open palm. The child can say, "May I have my toy back, please? I'm still playing with it." There's something about that open palm. For kids, it's like the universal sign for "I come in peace," and it's very effective. In the same way, we can train them to ask for a turn. "Can I please have a turn when you're done?" That teaches kids to respect someone else's time and property. One of the most effective communication skills that we can teach our kids is to use I messages, or an I feel statement. This is a tool you're going to want to use yourself and teach your kids. Let me explain how it works. Typically in a conflict, one may say to another, "You make me so mad," or "You always do this," "You never do that." But when we start a statement with you always, you never, we immediately put the other person on the defensive. When we feel threatened or attacked, we get defensive and we're not listening. We're not understanding the other person's point of view. Basically, we shut down and the learning opportunity is lost. So instead of using "you always" and "you never" statements, let's teach our kids to use I statements instead. An I statement has 3 parts to it: I feel, when you, and I wish. So when one kid takes the phone from another, instead of saying, "You always take my stuff without asking," we do training to say, "I feel hurt or angry when you take my phone without asking, and I wish you'd ask permission next time." Teaching I statements is important for several reasons. One, it teaches the child to identify and take responsibility for their feelings. That's a big part of emotional intelligence. It also reinforces that feelings are okay. It's okay to feel mad, angry, frustrated, hurt. Feelings are always okay, but some actions are not okay. The other reason I statements are so effective is that kids and adults instinctively respond to them. When someone says, "I feel hurt," kids can learn to empathize with another person's point of view. Again, a big part of emotional intelligence. You can use I feel statements with other important people in your life. If a difficult conversation comes up with your partner, instead of saying, "You always do this," or "You never do that," start with, "I feel hurt," or "I feel disrespected," and then the rest of the I statement. It's much more effective and doesn't put the other person on the defensive. And of course, using I statements with our kids is extremely powerful. Again, instead of saying, "You always have that attitude when you talk to me," say, "I feel hurt," or "I feel disrespected when you talk to me with that tone of voice, and I wish you'd speak to me in a more respectful way in the future." Starting with "I feel" makes the other person much more receptive to understanding your point of view. Again, do remember that learning these skills takes time. Don't expect your kids to use "I feel" statements in the heat of the moment. It's not going to happen in the beginning, and maybe not for a while. This will be a work in progress for sure. In fact, one of my favorite "I feel" moments was when my kids were little. I don't remember what the scuffle was even about, but I asked my youngest, Brent, to use an "I feel" statement with his brother. Well, without missing a beat, he said, "I feel that Ryan is an idiot." Well, that wasn't exactly what I had in mind, but you get the point. This training takes time. And so it was a clue for me that I tried to have this conversation while emotions were running way too high. With all of the tools in this section, be sure to wait till everyone is calm before you even attempt to coach them on conflict resolution. You'll want to role play how to use these skills a lot, so kids eventually learn to integrate them into their communication. You may also have to do some subtle coaching in the moment to remind your kids to use their new skills. Once again, having a nonverbal signal can be super helpful. That allows you to give a subtle reminder in the moment without getting overly involved in the situation. Taking time for training takes effort, but rest assured it is so worth it. Not only will it help the sibling relationships, but your child's future spouse will definitely thank you. So let's look at where we are. We've stayed out of fights as much as possible, and we've been conscientiously training our kids on conflict resolution strategies, because you can't do one without the other. If we're going to let kids handle conflict on their own, we have to take time for training on how to do that. But kids don't learn these new skills overnight, and there will be fights along the way. So let's talk about what to do in the heat of the moment. Up next, we'll talk about how to implement solution number 3, which is helpful adult intervention. I'll see you in the next lesson.